Well, so now it is my great delight to be able to introduce to you Dr. Ajay Goel. He is a professor and the director of translational genomics and oncology. He's also the director of research for gastrointestinal health at the Baylor Scott and White Research Institute, Baylor University Medical Center, located in Dallas, Texas. I was able to tour this facility just a month or so ago, and I was absolutely awestruck with the cutting-edge equipment and techniques that they have available at Baylor University Medical Center, especially their Cancer Treatment Center. He has worked in cancer research for more than 20 years and has been the lead author or has contributed to over 200 scientific articles and book chapters, mostly dealing with these topics. His current research focus is the prevention of gastrointestinal cancers using integrative and alternate approaches, and he is one of the world's leading experts on research on curcumin and cancer. And so I would like to introduce to you Dr. Ajay Goel. Welcome, Dr. Goel.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thanks for having me on this webinar. I'm very excited, and I'd like to say hello to all the people on the call, and I'll get started. So the topic of my research, as Cheryl mentioned, is mostly gastrointestinal cancers. Within that space, I've researched mostly on colon cancer, and that's something we'll talk today. So if you look into this slide, you see that we have done very well. If you look at the data from 1950s to early 2000s, we have done very, very well in terms of making progress in controlling heart disease. You see the numbers there. The blue bars represent data which was in 1950s, and the brown bars show the data in 2002. And you see we have cut down the heart disease by more than 50%, so which is fantastic. Similarly, we have done very, very well in terms of controlling cerebrovascular diseases. We have done very well in controlling pneumonias and influenzas and so forth. But when we look at cancer, really, there's not much change. Now, when I say that, I'm not trying to suggest that we have not learned anything new, we have not done better at understanding cancer or treatments, but a lot more remains to be desired. And when I say that, what it means is that, yes, we have done very well in terms of now understanding cancers. I think we have a good understanding how cancers evolve now compared to what we knew 50 years ago or 30 years ago. However, we are not making absolute progress. If you look at these numbers here, the reason is that although we are making some progress in finding cancers early on, we are making progress in developing some treatments which can help small subset of patients, but at the same time, we are doing something wrong with our lifestyle, with our diets, which has propelled the overall incidence and rates of cancers. So we are basically offsetting all the gains we are making in terms of medical advances by making poor choices, knowingly or unknowingly, that the overall rate of cancer has also increased at the same time. So that is why when you look at this graph, really there's not much change in overall death and incidence of cancer. And the things don't look very well if you look at the projected numbers for the number of cancers we hope to see or we're going to see in next decade or two. So if you look at this slide, it shows you the projections for cancer new cases which are going to be detected and the deaths associated with it. And if you see here, by 2030, we will have 20 million new cases and almost 14 million cancer deaths. So this is quite disturbing because I work on oncology. There are a lot of my other colleagues who work in this field, and we believe that we're making a lot of progress, but at the same time, I feel that there's not enough progress because if the overall incidence and deaths of cancer are going to continue to rise, so we need to rethink our strategy. We need to think what is wrong because we are making a lot of medical advances, but at the same time, we're not reaping the fruit of that advance. And these are the data from earlier last year, and if you see here, these are all the different kinds of cancers in both men and women. And you see that colon cancer or colorectal cancer, which is the cancers of colon and rectum, are still one of the most common cancers, one of the most frequent cancers in both men and women, and actually they remain the third most common cancer in both genders. So this is not good news, because colon cancer is one of those cancers, we'll talk later on in this conversation, that it is probably one of the most preventable cancers. But still, a lot of people are dying from this disease because we do not find this, we do not detect patients with this disease early on. And if you look, in men, prostate cancer is skyrocketing. The frequencies are very high. So 1 in 4 men is getting prostate cancer, and similarly, breast cancer is the #1 killer in women. So let's look at this slide. So this slide basically shows all the current modern treatments we have for treating patients with different cancers. So on the left side, you see the name of the drug, and next to that is different kinds of cancers. I apologize, some of these are acronyms, but I'll help you. But essentially, CRC means colorectal cancer, NSCLC means lung cancer, so forth. So, but that's not the point. The point is we have all these modern drugs. We call them targeted therapies. So which means we have a target in mind, which is listed in this table in the third column, the gene or the pathway. So target in many of the first few drugs is EGFR. So that's a target, and Erbutux or Iressa or Tarceva are the drugs we use currently for treating these patients. But what is wrong with this slide is the next column. So if you look at the fourth column, which states OS, means overall survival or gain in survival in months. So if you look at this slide, you see that for some of these treatments, we have a gain in survival. Once these patients are put on these drugs, the overall gain in survival is anywhere between 1.5 months, 4 months, 6 months, and in some cases actually none, which means that whether these patients take these drugs or not, they're not going to really improve their survival, which is quite disturbing, because if the patients were aware of this fact that if they're going to undergo these treatments and they're not going to have any gain in survival, or even if the doc tells the patient that you're going to live 1.5 months longer, and if you look at the last column, the cost associated with these treatments is insane. So if you look at the first example of Erbutux, there is an overall gain in survival of 1.5 months, and the annual cost for treatment of these patients is about $150,000 or $140,000. Now, the question I would raise is, if the patient is given these facts at the time of treatment, would any of these patients choose this treatment? And probably the likely answer would be no. Because if you're told that by taking this treatment, you're going to only live 6 weeks longer, and you're going to shell out about $140,000 each year, would you want to do that? I would say that probably more patients would choose not to do this if they had access to these kinds of data. And these are real data. You can look at the references below. So these are all the data we have, and which is quite disturbing, because this table does not also take into account the quality of life. And as you all know, that patients who undergo chemotherapies or treatments, when they're on these drugs, their quality of life is actually not very good. Some of these, in these cases, like for instance, if you're going to have a 6 weeks or 2 months gain in survival and your quality of life is not good, I mean, absolutely, the patients would not make a choice to undergo these treatments. So this is the problem with the current drug treatments we have. So that's why I said that the anti-cancer efficacy of the drugs, the modern drugs we have, is not adequate. It's actually dismal, and we need better approaches to treat patients with cancers. And the reason we are unable to use these drugs very effectively is relatively simple. And the reasons are that cancer is a very complex disease. Cancer takes several years and in some cases decades to develop. And there's so many genes, so many different pathways which have gone out of whack in these patients. So this slide, what you're seeing here is all these different circles, the gray circles and the red and green lines. This is the actual genomic sequencing. So just to simplify it, so if a cancer patient walks in, we take a biopsy or take the cancer tissue, and we run the analyses on all 20-some thousand genes we have in a tumor cells, and this is what they look like. So what you're seeing is all the red and green lines are all the connections between different pathways and different genes, and you see so many genes, or all the red genes, all the red lines basically shows that these pathways are not functioning correctly. So it is almost impossible that we can develop a drug which can go and fix all of these genes, all of these pathways, and that is the reason that we are unable to make these drugs we have currently very effective because they don't function. There's no way that I showed you in the previous table that these drugs are designed by default against a single target. But in cancers, not one gene or one pathway is messed up. The slide showed you that there's so many different genes are messed up, and that's part of the reason these drugs don't work at all. And even when they work in a very small subset of patients, but most patients do not get any benefit from these drugs. And that's why I say that the mono-targeted drugs, means single target, single drug, don't work on majority of the patients. And we need better approaches for targeting all different genes, all different pathways, and that's the way to go. And that's why in the last 50 years we have not made substantial progress in cancer treatments, because our fundamental way of treating patients is somewhat flawed. We need to rethink why these patients do not respond. And the answer is that because a single drug targeting a single gene will never, ever work. So this slide shows cancer incidence around the world. And if you see here, there's a key on the right upper hand corner, and you can see that different nations are colored with different colors, and we live in the U.S. here, and you see that North America is has the second highest cancer burden in the world. This is very disturbing to me, because I do research on this topic. I originally came from India, and this was always baffling to me, because U.S. is seen as one of the wealthiest nation, one of the nation with the best minds, best technologies, best infrastructure, best air we can breathe, best food we can eat, and so forth. But nonetheless, this slide shows that there is something wrong with the way things are going on here. So we have the second highest cancer burden in the world. So what are we doing wrong? I mean, why do we have such a high disease? And this slide shows the cancer burden, but I can also tell you that we can probably make similar kind of charts or slides for many other diseases in the U.S. In some ways, we have the highest disease burden of every kind in the U.S. So this was part of the trigger that I began to look into why different countries have different cancer incidence and cancer burden. And if you look through here very carefully, some of the nations, for example, India, I come originally from India, is one of the nations with a fairly low incidence of cancer. If you look in the key, it is the third lowest cancer incidence in the world, and which was quite puzzling to me, because, you know, in some of these countries, poverty is still a problem. People literacy is still a problem. People probably can't even afford a good meal. They don't breathe clean air, all of that. But in spite of all the challenges, all the dietary challenges, all the lifestyle challenges, all the environmental challenges, there's something they're doing correctly which is protecting them from all this cancer disease, or cancer incidence. And one of the things probably which my hypothesis, and I hope most of you would agree, is why are we having all these different colors in different countries? Because as a human race, we all are very, very similar. But what is different between all of us is when we live in different parts of the world, we have different dietary choices. We eat different kinds of foods, and that is probably foods and lifestyles probably put us at risk for getting different diseases, and that's part of the reason we have such a high cancer incidence in U.S. versus many other countries such as India. So that's why I say that dietary and lifestyle differences probably can explain why there's such a disparity, why there's so big differences between different nations in terms of cancer incidence. I work on colon cancer, and this slide shows that it is like I showed you before, it's a very common cancer in the U.S., but it is a very preventable cancer. If it can be detected early on, it can lead to more than 90% of the patients. If they can be detected with this disease early on, there's a likelihood that more than 90% of the patients will be permanently cured. If you take an advanced polyp out of colon, or if you take a stage 1 colon cancer out surgically, these patients have a more than 90% likelihood that they will never ever see cancer again, which is fantastic because these patients are virtually cured, but the challenge is we do not diagnose these patients early enough that they can be treated and be cured. And also in this slide, it shows that colon cancer incidence, I showed you in the previous slide, changes in different populations, but there's a very clear rationale that when people move from one part of the world to the other part, their colon cancer incidence changes. And here I showed you in this slide that in countries like Africa and India, there's 10 to 15-fold, 10 to 15 times lower colon cancer compared to U.S. And again, U.S. is one of the most, this is the most common leading cause of cancer deaths in the United States. And I said before, if none of us have a choice to get one kind of cancer, I would probably pick having colon cancer. The reason being, it is probably one of the only cancers which is truly preventable, again, if you can find it early enough. And it is one of those also cancers which is very tightly, very intimately linked with our diets. So what kind of diets we're eating, if you're eating healthy, if you're eating less fat, if you're exercising, if you are not eating too much red meat, all of those factors have been linked to colorectal cancers. And you see here changes in dietary habits in populations who migrate from low to high risk areas, their colon cancer incidence changes within 1 to 2 generations. And there's a lot of data that Japanese historically had one of the lowest incidences of colon cancers, but when these people moved to Hawaii to work in that country, within 1 generation, within 10 to 15 years, or within 10 to 20 years, their risk for colon cancer was identical to native Hawaiians. Why? Because one of the first things we do when we move from one place to another is we change our diet, and that puts at risk for getting colon cancers. This is a slide similar to the one I showed you before. The previous slide was about all cancers taken together, but this slide is specifically only for rates of colon cancers globally. And if you see again in this slide that countries like US, Western Europe, and Australia, there's historically always been very high incidence of colon cancers. But what was good was that some of the Asian nations, such as Vietnam, such as Japan, such as Korea, they historically had very low incidences of colon cancers. But what we are seeing in the last 5 to 10 years now is actually their risk for colon cancer is skyrocketing, and which is quite disturbing, that why these populations which were always protected from this disease, why their risk for colon cancer is increasing, and the answer is quite simple. The answer is that a lot of these populations are now adopting Western diets. They historically always would eat their own diets, but now we see a lot of Western influence in terms of diets. We see McDonald's, Burger Kings, and so forth. All of these Western food chains have reached to these countries, and a lot of people have chosen to make choices. They've chosen to adopt Western lifestyles, which is putting them at risk for getting higher colon cancer. Likewise, I told you that this is an international colon cancer incidence, and if you see here, Japan historically used to have one of the lowest incidence of colon cancers, but now Japan is one of the nations with one of the highest incidences of colon cancers, and it is probably largely environmental or dietary. So changes in diets very, very intimately linked to the risk for getting cancers. So now how do we put it all together? So we had a hypothesis that probably diets somehow influence something in our bodies which triggers or which puts it at risk for getting more cancer, and one of the fundamental processes is chronic inflammation. So by chronic inflammation, I do not mean acute inflammation, which we get if you suddenly fall down or if you have a bruise or a cut. That is acute inflammation. But what I'm talking here is chronic inflammation, which is completely asymptomatic. We don't have any symptoms, but this is, if it goes on for long periods of time, that puts it at risk for getting many chronic diseases, including cancer. So in other words, chronic inflammation is a spark which basically ignites multiple chronic diseases shown here, such as cancer, diabetes, arthritis, autoimmune diseases, and so forth. And uncontrolled chronic inflammation is a key factor to cancer, and if it persists for long periods of time, several years or decades, it can put us at risk for getting many diseases. And this kind of chronic inflammation can be triggered by multiple things, such as diets, we talked about, stress, oxidative damage, environmental pollutants, toxins, infections, blood glucose, which high sugar levels or fat. All of these can ignite chronic inflammation in our body, which puts it at risk for getting these chronic diseases and cancer. So this is a very simple model. So I showed in the previous slide stress, which stress could be anything. It could be a physical trauma, illness, toxins, or a psychological stress if you're emotionally down, or lack of sleep. So any kind of stress can trigger a very important protein or gene called NF-kappa B. So this is like a master regulator. This is a key gene which you do not want to overactivate. You don't want to mess with this gene, because once it gets active, it triggers inflammation in our body. And like I said in the previous slide, if there is high degree of inflammation, it leads to many diseases, including cancer. So we have to think about, I showed you before that the drugs we have currently, we call them mono-targeted therapies. They're not functioning, so we need to find drugs which can treat or which can target many different pathways at the same time. And also, we have to think about changing simple things in our life, which is changing our diets, because changing our diets can help us with preventing cancers, and I'm going to show you a lot of data on that. And also, we have to be careful that the drugs we use, they do not essentially regulate or they do not control the behavior of our genes. They simply go and shut some of the genes or some of the pathways off, but each gene, each pathway in our body has a function. So we are supposed to, in cancer or many diseases, some of these genes become overactive or underactive, and the function of a drug has to be to restore that balance, but most of these drugs fail to do that, and that is why we see the toxicity. So we need to develop ways where we can restore the function of these genes so that we have more benefit compared to the drugs we're using currently. So the question we asked for many years, one of my research interests is, can we find natural compounds that can suppress, that can regulate chronic inflammation safely? And I think safely is a very important word, because we have anti-inflammatory drugs, such as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs, which can control inflammation, which can suppress inflammation, but these compounds are not safe. They're good if you take them for a day or two or a very short period of time, but if you take them for long periods of time, they are associated with lots of toxicity, so they're not safe. So the key thing we were looking for was natural compounds and safe compounds. And this is a concept we have been chasing called nutrigenomics, or combination of nutrition and genomics. And the point is that anything we eat, anything nutrition has a direct link with our genomics or with our genes or their behavior. So we have been looking for ways how we can make dietary changes which can influence our genes in a positive way. And I hope you would appreciate this slide, because a lot of the anti-cancer drugs we are using currently for treating patients with cancer, most of these actually came from plants. Almost 75% of the drugs, 74% of the anti-cancer drugs we are using currently actually originated in plants. So by that, what I mean is, when we had evidence some of these plants, some of these herbs have anti-cancer activity, however, pharmaceutical companies cannot patent plants or herbs. So what they do is they identify what is the active ingredient in these plants, and then they will modify it just enough so that they can call it a drug, they can patent it, and now they can sell it to you for 1,000-fold price or even more. So, but the bottom line is, a lot of the drugs we are using actually did come from plants, and almost 25% of the prescription drugs we use in this country are derived from plants. So we have to really keep in mind that all of these plants and herbs we are surrounded by, a lot of these have medicinal value, and we should appreciate that. And this slide shows many different fruits and vegetables and superfoods which have been actively researched by many colleagues of mine in U.S. and other parts of the world. But the focus of my research has primarily been on turmeric, which is a spice and has an active natural medicine in it called curcumin, And the other plant which I work mostly is on boswellia or Boswellia serrata. And in the next few minutes, I'll show you the data we have gathered over the years, my research on curcumin. So curcumin, what is curcumin? So curcumin is the active principle in the spice turmeric. So turmeric is a spice with which we cook food, mostly comes from Southeast Asia and India. So if you have seen any Indian meal, you will see most of the meals are yellow in color, and that yellow pigmentation comes from curcumin. Curcumin has been known for hundreds and more than thousands of years. It's a very potent anti-inflammatory. So it reduces inflammation. It's a very potent antioxidant. It's a very potent antimicrobial, anti-carcinogenic herb. So it's been known for thousands of years that it has all of these activities. And more recently, we have shown, and now we have more than 8,000 scientific studies. So these are not tabloids or scientific or magazine articles. There are more than 8,000 scientific studies published on health benefits of curcumin, including a big part of that is its effects in cancers. So this is amazing because I do not know of any other herb or any other medication or any other modern drug for which we have even half of the evidence as we have for curcumin in terms of chronic diseases and cancer. So this is amazing. This basically goes on to show the power of this natural product, that how potent it is in controlling so many different diseases and cancers. And the key point is that turmeric is a spice, but only 2 to 5% of turmeric is curcumin. So we cannot just simply confuse that turmeric and curcumin are the same thing. No, curcumin is the active medicine, which is only 2 to 5% of turmeric. So turmeric is food and curcumin is the natural medicine. So we have to be careful. So if you want to use turmeric or curcumin, we have to be aware that if you're using it for any medicinal purposes, we must consider taking curcumin, not turmeric. So this slide shows curcumin has been studied for many, many different diseases, and if you see, it's been studied for many different cancers, and this is just a partial list that it has been studied for all different kinds of cancers. There's a lot of work on colon cancers, and this slide shows that unlike the slide I showed you before, the modern drugs we have are designed against a single target. And I've told you before that that approach has not worked for us because single target, single drug does not work. And if you see here, curcumin targets hundreds and thousands of different genes in our body, which is the way to go because, like I told you before, that in most chronic illnesses and cancers, it is not one gene which has gone wrong. It's many, many different genes. And in this slide, I can clearly show you that curcumin targets many, many different genes and pathways, and that is why it is so effective in treating many diseases, including cancer. This is another important slide which shows that not only curcumin helps in preventing cancers, but it is actually very effective at every stage of cancers. I get a lot of phone calls, emails from people who says, I already have cancer, what should I do now? Can I take curcumin if I already have cancers? And the answer to that is, look in the slide, that actually curcumin helps prevent every stage of cancer. So by that, what I mean is that if you already have cancer, and if you take curcumin by itself or with whatever treatment you're taking, whatever chemotherapy you're taking, if you combine your chemotherapy along with curcumin, you stand to slow down the progression of cancers. In many cases, I've seen many of these examples, people using curcumin once they have cancer, they see slow down of progression of their cancers, they see even reduction in their or reversal of their disease. They are downstage in terms of the cancer stage and so forth. And also in advanced cancers where there is a risk for cancer spread to other organs, curcumin has been found to be very, very effective in reducing metastases or spread of cancers. So the bottom line is it works at every stage. It helps prevent cancer, but if unfortunately anybody already have cancer, if they consider taking curcumin, it is going to benefit them even at that stage. No matter what the stage of tumor is, it is going to help you to some degree depending upon your disease. And we have shown this data, we have published some of these studies where we have shown that when cancers grow in our body, they don't grow on their own. They need very active communication of cancer cells, as shown on the left in the slide, with the normal cells. So cancer cells work with the normal healthy cells. They need that communication in order for them to thrive and grow. And we have shown that one of the mechanisms, one of the ways curcumin functions in preventing cancers or treating cancer is it blocks the communication. It blocks the communication between cancer cells and healthy cells. So this is very, very important, and we have published this a few years ago that curcumin impedes or breaks down this communication barrier, which allows, if cancer cells cannot talk to the normal cells, they cannot survive on their own, so they begin to die. So I briefly mentioned that curcumin is, we have done quite a bit of work that curcumin on its own is very, very effective for preventing cancer. However, patients who already have cancer and they're taking some sort of chemotherapy, one of the most common questions I'm asked is, I'm already taking some sort of chemotherapy or some sort of radiation therapy. Can I take curcumin with my chemotherapy? And there are many, many studies which have been done to show, including a lot of the work we have published, that curcumin, when combined with chemotherapy, actually it improves the efficacy of chemotherapy. By that, what I mean is, a lot of the patients, once they're in chemotherapy, they will develop chemo resistance after a few months or several months of treatment, which means that their tumor cells begin to stop responding to chemotherapy and they become resistant. So we have shown data that those patients who have become resistant to chemotherapy, if they take curcumin, if they combine curcumin with their treatment, they become responsive again. So it helps improve chemotherapy. Curcumin, I showed you in the previous slides, prevents cancer cell communication. It increases apoptosis, which means programmed cell death. So it increases that. By that it means it kills cells at a much more effective manner compared to on their own, because one of the things which goes wrong with cancer cells is they don't follow this business of programmed cell death. Every cell in our body is programmed to die at a certain time point, and in cancer cells, this process is altered. It doesn't function very effectively. That's why these cancer cells continue to live, they continue to thrive, but once these patients begin to take curcumin, this program becomes active again, and this is one of the ways curcumin kills these cancer cells. And also, we have shown data that in colon cancer, the standard of care treatment is 5-fluorouracil, which is the most common chemotherapy in cancer patients, but only 10 to 15% of colon cancer patients respond to this treatment. And even when they respond initially, they will develop chemo resistance at some point during the treatment, so they will become unresponsive. And we have shown that when these patients, in this kind of model, when these patients are given curcumin, they become responsive to 5-FU treatment again. We have even shown data that we can reduce the dose of chemotherapy by up to 10 times, which means by reducing the dose of chemotherapy by 10 times would lead to 10 times lower toxicity. And most of the cancer patients, when they are chemotherapy, they do not die mostly because of their disease. They die from the toxicity from these chemotherapies, and we have shown very clearly that by combining curcumin with chemotherapy can reduce the toxicity, and one of the ways it does is it actually modulates or regulates the expression of certain super genes or microRNAs, and that is one of the very effective ways that when you combine curcumin with 5-FU, it leads to more tumor death. And here is an example of this, what I was talking about. Here what you're seeing is colon cancers, tumors. In the upper panel, you're seeing, this is an animal study where these animals are either not treated or they're given curcumin alone. And you see that when these animals were given curcumin alone, the colon cancers are much smaller in most of the animals. However, when they were given 5-FU or 5-fluorouracil, the response wasn't as great. But when we combine curcumin with 5-FU, you see most of these tumors are gone. These are so small, and this is only a 3-week-long study. So this goes on to show that combining 5-FU or chemotherapy along with curcumin is a very, very effective way of deriving much better benefit from chemotherapy and reducing the toxicity in these patients. And also, we showed in this slide that by combining curcumin with 5-FU, actually, I just mentioned before, it enhances apoptosis, which means more tumor cell death. There are many studies on curcumin in terms of its effect on chemotherapy. Some of these are listed on this slide. And the reason, so I think the most important thing is, I need to go over on this slide for a few seconds, is why is curcumin so effective in patients with chemotherapy? And the reason is simple. In a cancer patient, we have three kinds of cells. We have normal healthy cells, we have cancer cells, and we have a very, very small proportion of something we know as cancer stem cells. So the goal of any chemotherapy is to kill cancer cells, which it does very effectively. So chemotherapy kills cancer cells very effectively, but the challenge is that the chemotherapy kills your normal cells also with the same efficacy, which is not desired, because if you kill your normal cells, that leads to all the toxicity most patients experience once they have chemotherapy. So we want treatment which would not kill our normal cells, but that's a limitation of chemotherapy. But at the same time, chemotherapy does not kill cancer stem cells, which is a problem, because if you leave these cells behind, these are the reasons why most cancer patients, they experience tumor relapse or recurrence few months or few years once their tumors have been treated, because these cancer cells, they just hide, and once the chemotherapy treatment is stopped, they come back and then they continue to grow. And the second time patients experience chemotherapy, the tumors are a lot more aggressive and a lot more lethal. However, when these patients are given curcumin kills cancer cells, but it does not kill your normal healthy cells. This is the reason why curcumin is so effective. It is not toxic, it protects your normal cells, but at the same time, it kills your cancer stem cells, which means there's a higher chance that these patients will not experience tumor recurrence or relapse down the line. So the bottom line is, combining curcumin with chemotherapy reduces tumor recurrence. Curcumin helps kill cancer stem cells and reduces the toxicity from chemotherapy. Now, there are many studies being done on cancer prevention by curcumin. Some of these are listed here, a lot of gastrointestinal cancers, lung cancer, blood cancers, and name it. So actually, to the best of my knowledge, really there's no disease for which curcumin has not been studied or is currently not being studied. So a lot of research being done on colon, gastric, and other GI cancers with curcumin. There are a lot of ongoing human clinical trials, not only in the U.S., but in many other parts of the world as well. One of the other small point I would like to touch upon here is part of my research is focused on studying this mechanism called epigenetics. So epigenetics is a compound word which is epi and genetics. So genetics is the DNA we are born with, but epigenetics is a process which basically dictates how our genes are expressed or behaved, and which is very, very closely linked with our diets and toxins. And the point is that our genetics only takes us so far, but it's not about our genes. It is about our diets and lifestyles, which influence how our genes are going to behave. Are our genes going to behave in a good or bad fashion? And here is one of the examples, and our group was one of the first ones which showed that I talked briefly about programmed cell death, or our cells have a definitive, each cell in our body has a time clock built in. So what that means is every cell in our body dies at a certain time point. And what is essentially cancer? Cancer is basically a growth of normal cells which don't die. So some of these cells, they don't die, they continue to live, new cells continue to form, and we have a huge mass of cells which is basically cancer or tumor. And this process of tumor cell death at a given time point is controlled by certain genes. And in cancer cells, some of these genes which are supposed to give this signal to the cell, time to die, they begin to go to a sleep mode. They don't function. And once they're not functioning, these cells don't die. And what we have shown is this is a very fundamental process, and we have shown that when we treat these cancer cells with curcumin, we can reactivate these genes, and as soon as these genes become reactive, they come out of the sleep mode. They begin to give these signals to the cancer cells, time to die, and within days, within hours, actually, these cancer cells begin to die. So that is another way how curcumin works in killing these cancer cells. So this is one of my last slides. I showed you the example that these are the kind of drugs we have currently. We have the drugs shown here in green, celecoxib, Erbitux, Herceptin, so forth. They are targeting single drug, single pathway, and curcumin can actually target all of these genes a lot more effectively but in a safe manner. So why would you choose a drug which is going to cost $100,000 and it's only going to hit one target or one gene, while curcumin, which costs much, much lesser and can target all of these targets. But not only this, it can actually hit so many more targets, including the epigenetic targets I mentioned. So the bottom line is that compared to the modern drugs we use, single drug, single treatment is not the best way to do. Curcumin can actually hit hundreds and thousands of targets, and this is the more effective, safer way of treating cancer patients, and that's why we're seeing all the benefits with curcumin. So in addition to curcumin, curcumin comes from the spice turmeric. We also know that turmeric is not just about curcumin. Curcumin is only 2 to 5% of turmeric, but turmeric has important essential oils. And there's a lot of research being done now that essential oils present in turmeric increase the efficacy of turmeric. These oils are anti-mutagenic, they're anti-cancer, and there are animal studies done in colon cancer that these essential oils which are present in turmeric can actually help promote anti-cancer effects of curcumin. So go to the next one. So for this reason, the slide I showed you before, that the essential oils present in turmeric are very important. In my research, I've used this specific extract of curcumin called BCM95 curcumin because this BCM95 curcumin is essentially curcumin blended together with essential oils from turmeric, which I showed you in the previous slide. They have their own efficacy, and they work synergistically together with curcumin, and that's the reason I use BCM95 in my research. And in this study, we showed that not only curcumin, when we combine curcumin with boswellia, actually the combination of the two is a lot more potent in killing cancer cells. And this happens by increased apoptosis, and we were able to show in this study that within second or third day of the treatment with this combination, these cancer cells begin to die a lot more effectively. So of course, we need more data on this topic, but the point here is that curcumin is a very potent anti-inflammatory agent. Boswellia is another very potent anti-inflammatory agent, but they hit different pathways of inflammation, and when you bring them together as a combination, they're a lot more potent than these compounds individually. So this is my last slide. So these are some of the take-home messages that curcumin is a very potent natural medicine. It's a very potent anti-inflammatory, which has been shown to be very effective in arthritis, chronic pain, depression, Alzheimer's, and a lot of work on cancer. There are more than 8,000 published scientific studies which have shown benefits of curcumin. This is a question which comes up all the time. Should I take turmeric or curcumin? The answer is turmeric is a spice. Yes, you should consider cooking your food with turmeric, but if you're looking for immediate or short-term health benefits, one should consider taking curcumin, and it is better to use curcumin supplements, which you can find anywhere in a health food store. In addition to using curcumin for treatment of a disease, I strongly recommend that we should consider taking prophylactic use of curcumin as a health supplement when we are healthy. So consider taking a supplement of curcumin anywhere between 250 to 700 milligrams per day, because if you use it just like your multivitamin every day, it can help prevent a lot of diseases, including cancers down the line. And we have shown data that curcumin is not only effective on its own, but also it functions as a very beautiful adjunct, very potent adjunct when combined with chemo or radiation therapy. And last but not the least, it's the most important thing that not all curcumin extracts are same. So there are a lot of different extracts available on the market, but one has to be very careful taking a curcumin supplement which is much more bioavailable, has a higher absorption rate, and is also possibly as natural as possible. And that's part of the reason I've used BCM95 curcumin in my research, because it is 7 to 10 times more bioavailable. It is all natural. It contains essential oils from turmeric. And likewise, for my boswellia research, I've used Bos Pure because this is standardized to high ACBA content. And with this, I will stop, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Goel. I certainly appreciate that. Every time I hear you speak, I learn something new. We already have some questions that are showing up in our Q&A, so if you have a few moments, I'd have a couple I'd like to run past you. First is, curcumin, is it safe to take during pregnancy?
Yes, as much as I'm aware, there's no contraindication, and I've known a lot of pregnant women who take curcumin during pregnancy. So I do not see any issue. At least I'm not aware of any scientific studies which have suggested otherwise.
Right. So, and as with all supplements, we always encourage you to discuss it with your healthcare practitioner prior to use to make sure it's right in your individual situation. Excellent. Here's another question about this call, people who want to hear it again or want to refer other people to it. So I just want to let everyone know, give us a day, maybe two, and this will all be uploaded onto the Terry Talks Nutrition YouTube channel. So you can, if you have friends that you think that they would find this interesting or important for them, you can refer them to the YouTube channel. If you want to review it yourself, if you came in late and weren't able to hear the first part, absolutely, just go to YouTube and look for the Terry Talks Nutrition channel. Additionally, links to the playbacks of our webinars are also available on the Terry Talks Nutrition website. And Terry Talks Nutrition is a natural medicine information website. On that website, you can listen to these recordings. You can ask Terry your specific questions, and you can also sign up for a free weekly newsletter. So information, people who want to have more information, that's another excellent resource. Another question. This person has gastroesophageal reflux disease. They've had GERD for a long time. Is it okay to take curcumin while they have GERD?
Absolutely. I've actually, several of my colleagues here at Baylor who have been using curcumin very, very regularly for GERD, and they're seeing phenomenal results. And there's a lot of scientific studies. Even I would strongly recommend going to this NIH website for scientific studies, but some of these studies may be too complex for people. But if you simply Google the word GERD and curcumin, you will see that there's a lot of studies been done on GERD, and curcumin has been found very, very effective.
You know, I think that there are individuals who maybe are afraid of curcumin because they've eaten Indian food that's that brilliant yellow in nature that has a lot of turmeric in it, and it's very, very spicy. But turmeric itself is not like a hot chili pepper. It shouldn't cause any irritation whatsoever, should it?
No, and Cheryl, you're right on with that. So turmeric itself is not spicy or has any strong taste at all. And I think if the perception is that because Indian food was very spicy and we should stay away from it, that shouldn't be the premise here. I mean, curcumin by itself is really not spicy at all, and it is, like we talked in the last hour, it's a very strong anti-inflammatory, and GERD, inflammation is a big part of it. So if you can suppress inflammation, you're going to see a lot of benefit in these patients.
Excellent. Here's a person who wants to know recommended dosages for individuals who have breast cancer or ovarian cancer. I know that that's still an area that needs greater levels of investigation, but if someone asks you, I want to take a curcumin supplement, perhaps it's an enhanced absorption supplement, what dosage do you recommend per day?
Yes, I think, Cheryl, that's a very important question again, but I really do not have a very good answer because, you know, the whole concept of dosing comes from pharmaceutical drugs, because the challenge there or the risk there is that if you do not take the right dose, if you do a little bit more or less, you either may not see the effect, or if you go more, you can hurt yourself because they are toxic. But when it comes to natural compounds such as curcumin, really they're derived from our diets. So they're fairly safe, and there are tons of studies done on curcumin that even up to 10, 12 grams of curcumin has no toxicity. But having said that, I would strongly caution that we don't have a very empirical way of defining a dose, but for most cancer patients, I would say a dose of about 1 to 2 grams a day, split over the day. Don't take all your curcumin in one meal. So I would say split it over 2 or 3 times over the day, but up to 2 grams or even up to 3 grams, depending upon what the stage of disease is. But again, just like you mentioned before, Shell, anybody who is considering taking curcumin for any health reasons, they must first consult with their physician, because they may be taking some other drugs or other things, or it is just a good practice to consult with their physician before they do anything.
Excellent, excellent. And I know it also makes a difference whether it has the turmeric essential oil in it or not, because that reduces how much you have to take, correct? So you wouldn't take the 12 or 14. That's why you say most people can do 2, even 3 grams a day? Right.
Exactly, because, and that's part of the reason I've used BCM95 in my research, because if it's 7 to 10 times more bioavailable, what that means is you don't need to take 7 to 10 times more to see the same level of benefit. So using 2 grams of a high absorption curcumin, which has essential oil from turmeric, is a much more effective, much more safer way of doing it, rather than taking way too many pills of any generic curcumin.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question about what age is it safe to start taking curcumin?
Again, I do not have a good answer, but what I can tell you is that I have 2 little boys. Now they're 13 and 11, but I've been giving them curcumin for the last good 5 or 6 years. So, but I think one should be careful in terms of dosing. So I think that the dose of curcumin for children versus adults should be different. So I think a dose of anywhere between 100 milligrams or 200 milligrams for young kids, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years old is fine. But going younger than that, I do not have any experience. There are no scientific studies, but I would assume there are 1.3 billion people in India, and a lot of these are children, and they eat turmeric every single day, and I do not know of any toxicity from turmeric. So I would think it is very safe even in younger kids, because it's just diet, it's a spice, it comes from spice. But yes, we should be considerate of the dose. So if it's a small dose, it should be very, very safe for very young kids even.
Mm-hmm. Here's a good question. Individuals who want to find studies on melanoma and other cancers, what's the best way to find studies for curcumin and cancer?
So
I think they want to review them. I don't think I don't think they want to enlist in them or participate in them. I think they're asking where do you go to find these studies?
Yes. So I think the official search engine to find these studies would be National Institutes of Health website, which publishes all these studies, which is PubMed, P-U-B-M-E-D. So you can go to PubMed, you can put curcumin, you can look at melanoma, you will see studies. But a lot of these studies may be too complex for people if they're not scientifically very savvy. So I think a lot of the information these days you can find by Googling these things, because somebody may have done a easy version of it. But at the same time, I mean, the official search engine would be PubMed. And if people do not have access to specific studies, but they're interested in reading, I'm always more than happy. My email address is here. They can always email me, and I'll be happy to share any studies they would be interested in looking at.
Excellent. And I would offer a bit of caution, since I spend a great deal of my time looking at research studies, that just because you find it on the internet, especially if it's in a non-traditional website, don't automatically assume that everything you read is true. Read it with a grain of salt and compare and contrast until you decide what's the right answer for you. And I've used the PubMed.gov, G-O-V. Make sure you do the .gov, folks, because if you do PubMed.com or .edu, you're going to end up in a totally different site. But that's a really nice. The last time I looked, there were almost 9,000 studies just on the search term curcumin. I think it was 8,880 something.
That's correct. So it's close to 9,000 studies now. Yes.
Here's a question of, are there any benefits of curcumin for psoriasis, and how would you go about using curcumin for psoriasis?
Yeah, I mean, again, if you go to this website, PubMed, we just talked about, I'm just doing a search, and there are several hundred studies with curcumin and PubMed. I think everybody have to be careful in the sense that you have to, again, discuss with your physician, but there's a lot of scientific studies on psoriasis and curcumin. You can use it as a supplement, you can orally consume it, and also people use it sometimes in curcumin-containing ointments and lotions and so forth, so you can even use it locally as well as you can ingest it as a supplement.
I heard that boswellia is also a good intervention for psoriasis because there's a lot of 5-lipoxygenase inflammation activation in psoriasis. Is that something you've heard?
I've seen some studies on that. Compared to curcumin, though, the evidence is somewhat less, but the studies I've read on boswellia, you're correct. So the level of evidence in these few studies has been very, very promising.
Oh, excellent. Good to know. Another question, and I'm sure you get asked this all the time, is curcumin a blood thinner?
It is. So it is a blood thinner, but again, it's not like a blood thinner, but you would think of drugs such as warfarin and so forth. So, but yes, it is blood thinner, and one should be careful if you are taking any other blood thinner. One should be careful. That's one category of drugs. One should be careful. Not to say that it's going to hurt you too much, but one should be watchful. One should be careful if you're taking any other blood thinner such as warfarin before you consider taking curcumin.
I had heard that, again, in agreement with you, I had heard that it is not a strong blood thinner, that most botanicals have some ability to reduce the stickiness of platelets, which are the cells that clump together in clots, and that's a protective mechanism to help protect against both heart attack and stroke. So it's not a downside, and it's not a strong blood thinner, for example, that people would get bloody noses or that they would start bruising or that if they get cut, they're not going to stop bleeding. It only really comes into play with people that are talking to their doctors about using with prescription blood thinners. Has that been your experience?
That's precisely. I think, Cheryl, you summarized this beautifully. So yes, exactly. I mean, on its own, it is not a potent blood thinner, but when people are using some sort of prescription blood thinners, there is some degree of caution they must exercise because there's not that much science out there. So other than that, I don't think on its own it has blood thinning activity potent enough to be anything to be worried about.
Here's a person who had a comment who said they took a liquid turmeric extract that burned their stomach and they stopped taking it. Are capsules any better? I would not be aware of turmeric causing burning in the stomach. Maybe there was something else in the liquid product they were using that caused irritation to the gastric lining, but I've never heard of individuals using capsules expressing any burning of the stomach lining. Have you, Dr. Goel?
No, I've not heard of any burning. Yes, every now and then you hear from somebody having slight stomach discomfort, but not about burning, because if your bodies have never used curcumin before, some people will experience some degree of stomach discomfort for a day or so, but nothing like stomach burning. And if you stay on it for a day or two, you get over it very, very fast.
Here's a person who's attending today because her 33-year-old son has stage 3 colon cancer, has received 9 rounds of chemo and has 3 rounds of chemo left to go, and wants to know if you take appointments from colon cancer patients.
I'm really sorry to hear that. I did not discuss during my talk. Colon cancer historically has been thought of a disease of elderly people, and the median age of colon cancer in this country used to be about 65. But we are seeing more and more younger people now getting this disease, and I still believe that it has something to do with our diets and so forth. In terms of appointments, no, I'm a researcher. I do not see patients. I do not take appointments. But having a stage 3 colon cancer and 9 rounds of chemo, I know it's a lot to go through, but based on my research, based on many other colleagues of mine who have done research of combining curcumin with 5-fluorouracil, which probably was a chemotherapy used in this person's case, I would strongly encourage you to consider taking curcumin. Of course, just like I said before, please do consult with your physician before you do that, but show them some of the stuff I've talked about. Pull up some more studies from internet. I'll be happy to send some more studies if somebody needs it, but there's very good evidence that combining curcumin with 5-fluorouracil is extremely helpful, so that may be one option to consider.
That's very kind of you. Do you have a way that people can contact you, Dr. Goel?
Yes, I'm always happy to answer my emails. So my email address, I don't know if it was on one of the slides. Otherwise, it's my first name, Goel @baylorhealth.edu. So I'm happy to answer any emails.
I think we have that on slide 5. So we've been asking a lot. So I'm gone back to slide 5. So it's Ajay Goel @baylorhealth.edu.
Yes, and I always try to answer emails as fast as I can, unless I'm traveling too much. So, but I will always answer emails, and I'll be happy to help provide any information or studies to anyone.
Excellent. Let me scroll through and make sure I didn't hear. Here's a person who's interested in boswellia with curcumin, and they want to know if you have a dosage recommendation for boswellia.
So boswellia on its own could be anywhere between 100 to 300, 400 milligrams, but if it's a combination, I believe a smaller dose would be okay. So I believe Europharma has a product, the combination of curcumin and boswellia. Cheryl, do you want to say more about it?
Yeah, I think that there's lots of companies that would have this combination, and so if you are interested in more information, just contact us at the Terry Talks Nutrition website, and we'll see if we can find more information for you. Here's a question that's come through that's found. Are you aware of any chemotherapy or any type of cancer chemotherapy that they've yet investigated that you cannot use curcumin with?
I have not seen any convincing evidence. I've seen probably a sporadic report, but for the most part, all the cancer chemotherapies I've seen, really, of course, we don't have scientific studies on every single chemotherapy combining with curcumin, but for the most part, I've yet to see a convincing, repetitive, reproducible evidence for any chemotherapy for which curcumin has been contraindicated.
Well, good. Good to know. Here's another question. It says, obesity is highly prevalent in India. You know, I was not aware that obesity is prevalent in India, but perhaps in certain areas it might be. And obese individuals have inflammation in their body. When people are obese, does this make them more susceptible to cancer?
Absolutely, and I think whoever asked this question, they're correct. So obesity is still a challenge in India, and like I said before, obesity is not the only challenge. The diabetes is another one, which is again linked very closely to obesity too. And yes, both obesity and diabetes leads to higher levels of inflammation. But in spite of all of the obesity and diabetes, which are the two major problems in India, still these people are protected against cancer, and I believe, I'm not trying to suggest that it is all because of curcumin, but nonetheless, I think there's something about their diets. Maybe it's curcumin, maybe it's other spices, maybe it's other herbs. If you look at a typical Indian meal, it is not about curcumin alone or turmeric alone. We use tons of spices, tons of herbs and spices, and I think probably all put together, maybe there is some sort of medicinal value to the diets these people have, that they're still, in spite of all the challenges with obesity and diabetes, they're still protected from cancer.
But it's still nowhere near the obesity rate of the United States, correct?
Not anywhere close to that, no.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is yet another area where the United States is #1, and we don't want to be #1.
Yes.
All right. Let me just go through and make sure I didn't miss anything. So scrolling through the questions, I think we covered everything. And we had a few more comments of asking where they can hear this again. So let me scroll down. I hope you've all had time to write down Dr. Goel's email address so that you can also hear a recording of this on YouTube. There's a Terry Talks Nutrition YouTube channel. So as I said, give us a day or so, but very quickly this will be uploaded onto that channel so that you can go back and review or listen or recommend it to other folks. Additionally, we have the links also on the Terry Talks Nutrition website. And one last quick question came in before we closed, Dr. Goel. They said, thank you very much for such an informative presentation. And they wondered, why have we rarely heard or nobody ever talks about cancer stem cells? Is this relatively new science?
It is, yes, in some regards, yes, it is new science, but we have known about cancer stem cells a long time, but we have not discussed much of it because it's just a lack of educational process. So, but now we are recognizing why the drugs we have, why the pharmaceutical drugs we have for treating cancer patients are not really working, although we've been making so much effort for the last, 2, 3, 4 decades. And this is why this debate has brewed up again, because part of the reason it is not functioning is because of these stem cells. So we are recognizing more and more that the reason most cancer patients, even when they see the benefit originally when they take chemotherapy, and most cancer patients or some subset of cancer patients do see benefit when they take chemotherapy for a short period of time, but then give it a year or two, the cancer comes back, cancer is a lot more aggressive, and now we are learning that all of that is primarily or to the large extent controlled by these cancer stem cells, which we call them sort of rogue cells. They stay in hiding, and the chemotherapy does not target them. And now we are recognizing that this second episode of cancer relapse is primarily because of cancer stem cells, and we need to develop drugs or treatments of some sort, and I showed you the evidence that curcumin can do that very, very effectively, that we need to target not just the cancer cells, but cancer stem cells. So this is a very, very important area which is going to gain more and more attention in the coming years.
Well, it's just fascinating, and who knows, I hope you'll come back and join us again for another webinar presentation, and who knows what new science we'll be finding out about at that time. It seems like it's like a snowball going downhill. The research just keeps piling up faster and faster and faster.
Absolutely. I'm very, very enthused with where we're going with the whole concept of cancer treatment. I think one of the take-home messages from my talk is that, yes, we have made some progress in cancer understanding, but now we have to use this knowledge. We have to understand the basics, and we have to use these simple concepts of diets and lifestyles and how profound effect they have in helping us prevent cancer and possibly treat cancers. And I think there's going to be a lot more coming in the next few years. And I'll be happy to join in future.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy day to learn more about natural interventions for colon cancer, more about the development of colon cancer and risk factors and promises and hope for the future as research begins to unravel how best to treat this sometimes very devastating disease. So thank you again to our guest, Dr. Goel, and thank you to all of you. I hope you'll join us again for another Terry Talks Nutrition educational webinar. And until that time, good health to you. Bye-bye.